I found him 3 miles from camp, half buried in the drift where the wind had piled the snow against a low ridge. His name was Tulak. He had been my friend since we were boys. I knew him by his caribou skin parka and the small bone amulet his mother had stitched into the collar before he ever held a harpoon. He was frozen solid. His rifle lay beside him in the snow, the barrel still pointing toward the open tundra. I picked it up with my mitten and worked the lever. The cartridge slid out clean, loaded, never fired. That was the first thing that stopped my breath. A man does not freeze with a loaded rifle in his hand unless something took him faster than his fear could move his finger. The second thing was the snow around him. There was no struggle, no drag marks, no blood. His knife was still in its sheath. His sled was nowhere in sight. He had simply stopped walking, or had been stopped, and the cold had taken what was left. The third thing I will carry until I die, the tracks. They circled him in a wide ring, pressed deep into the hard crust. Wolf tracks, but not wolf tracks. Each print was longer than the span of my hand from wrist to fingertip, and I am not a small man. The claws had cut through ice that my own boots could barely crack. The stride between them was longer than a man is tall. I stood there in the white silence and felt the tundra watching me. The wind shifted once, slow and quiet, the way breath moves across the back of a neck. I left Tulak where he lay. I had no choice. Something was still out there. My name does not matter for this account. What matters is that I am Inuit, born on the western coast of what the white traders call Baffin Island, and in the winter of that year, 1894. I was 31 years old and counted among the steadier hunters of our camp. I had taken seals at the breathing holes since I was a boy. I had run dog teams across the sea ice in weather that killed lesser men. I knew the land the way a man knows the inside of his own house. That winter came early. The first true freeze settled over us before the moon had even thinned. The sea ice locked solid weeks ahead of its usual time, and the caribou that should have been moving through our valleys had already passed, faster and farther than anyone remembered. By the time the elders called for the hunting parties to gather, the meat caches were thinner than they should have been, and the dogs were already beginning to whine at night for food we could not give them. There were 5 of us who would later matter to this story. There was Nanak, broad-shouldered and quiet, a man who believed every old word the elders ever spoke. There was Akuma, our best tracker, who could read a print in the snow the way a southerner reads a letter, and who trusted only what his own eyes could measure. There was Pana, young, no more than 17, eager in the way boys are eager before they have lost anything. And there was Elder Aputi, too old to hunt, but never too old to speak, who came with us only as far as the staging camp, to bless the sleds and to listen to the wind. And there was me, the one writing this down through the hand of another, because I never learned the letters myself. We left the main settlement on a morning so cold the air cracked in our throats. 5 sleds, 40 dogs, supplies for 6 weeks. The plan was simple. Push north along the coast, then inland through the frozen valleys, find the caribou, and bring back enough meat to carry the village to spring. The tundra in winter is not empty. It is silent, which is a different thing. Silence in the Arctic is heavy. It presses on the ears. The only sounds are the dogs, the runners of the sled, and the wind when it chooses to speak. You learn to listen past the silence, because anything that breaks it is either food or danger. For the first 3 days we heard nothing at all. That, I should have understood sooner, was the warning. On the 4th day, the dogs began to refuse. We had reached a low pass between 2 ridges where in past winters the caribou trails ran thick. The snow there was wind-scoured and hard, easy travel. The lead dog of my team, an old gray male named Siku, planted his paws halfway through the pass and would not move. He did not growl. He did not bark. He lowered his head and stared at the open ground ahead, and his ears lay flat against his skull. I had run Siku for 9 winters. He had pulled me through storms that killed other dogs. He had never refused a trail in his life. Ikuma came up alongside me on foot, his rifle slung across his back. He crouched and looked at the snow, and then he stood and looked a long time at the horizon. He did not speak. He pointed. A set of tracks crossed the pass from east to west. At first I thought they were bear because of the size, but bears do not move that way. Bears waddle. Bears leave wide, flat prints with the toes splayed. These prints were narrow, deep, four-toed, with the claws set forward like a runner. They were wolf tracks. They were only shaped like wolf tracks. The size was wrong. Each one could have held both my fists pressed together. The stride between them was the length of a sled. Ikuma measured one with the haft of his knife and said nothing. Nanak came over, looked once, and stepped back. He muttered a word under his breath that I did not catch. He would not say it again when I asked. That night, at our camp, we heard the first howl. It came from the north, low and long, and it did not sound like any wolf I had ever heard. Wolves call in a chorus. Wolves answer each other. This call came once, alone, and nothing answered it. The dogs did not howl back. The dogs pressed themselves against the sleds and shivered, and one of them whimpered like a beaten child. We pushed on the next morning because we had to. A hunting party that turns back without meat brings hunger home with it, and hunger in our country kills more surely than any animal. But we pushed on differently. The sleds stayed closer together. The rifles came out of their wrappings and rode across our laps. Pana, the young one, kept looking over his shoulder, and Ikuma told him sharply to watch the trail instead, because a man who watches behind him walks his team into a crevasse. We found the first trap that afternoon. It was one of Nanak's old fox sets, left from the previous season and meant to be checked on this run. It had been torn apart, not sprung. Torn. The iron jaws had been bent outward as though something had pried them open from the inside, and the chain that anchored it to a buried stake had been snapped clean. The stake itself, a piece of hardwood as thick as my wrist, had been pulled from the frozen ground and lay splintered 10 paces away. Ikuma turned the stake over in his hands. He had seen wolverines wreck traps before. Wolverines are strong for their size and clever, and they do that kind of damage. But not like this. The wood had been bitten through. The marks of the teeth were as wide as my open palm. We found 3 more traps that day, all of them the same. By the next morning we had found the wolves. There were 4 of them, full-grown, lying in a hollow not far off our line of march. They had been killed within hours of each other. Their bodies were not eaten. That was the part I keep returning to in my mind. A predator that kills 4 wolves and does not eat them is not hunting for food. It is hunting for territory. Their necks were broken. One of them had been driven so hard into the snow that the impact had cracked the ice crust beneath it, and the body lay half sunken in a frozen hollow shaped like itself. Nanak knelt by the wolves and prayed quietly in the old way. Ikuma watched him and said nothing for a long while. Then he said, "This is not a wolf that did this." Pana asked what it was, and no one answered him. We turned back that night, not toward home, but toward the staging camp where Elder Aputi waited with the supply sleds. We needed to resupply, and we needed to speak with him. None of us said it aloud, but each of us was hoping he would tell us something that made the world make sense again. We reached the staging camp after a hard half-day's run. Aputi was sitting outside his shelter when we arrived, wrapped in his old bearskin, smoking a small bone pipe. He watched us come in, and he watched our faces, and before any of us spoke, he nodded once, slowly, as though he had already heard. That night, around the fire inside the largest tent, with the wind beginning to rise outside, he told us. He said that when he was a boy, his own grandfather had told him of a creature that walked the deep tundra alone, not a pack animal. Not a spirit exactly, though some of the old ones called it one. A wolf, but greater than a wolf. Taller at the shoulder than a standing man. Broader through the chest than a bull walrus. It hunted those who hunted carelessly, he said. It hunted those who took more than the land could give. It hunted those who went too far, into places where men were not meant to go. He called it Amarok. I had heard the name before in childhood, the way children hear all the old names. It had always been a story for the long winter nights, the kind of tale used to keep small boys from wandering past the edge of the camp lamps. I had never thought of it as a thing that left tracks. A Pewdie said his grandfather had known 3 men who went out and did not return in a single winter when he was young. Their sleds had been found. Their dogs had been found, some dead, some run wild. The men themselves had never been recovered. The old people had said then that Amarok had taken them because the hunting had been too hard that year, and the men had pushed into the high inland valleys where the spirits keep their own herds. He looked at each of us in turn around the fire. He looked longest at me. He said, "The years when the freeze comes early and the caribou run far, those are the years when it walks." He said, "You have crossed into a place that does not belong to you." He said, "Turn around in the morning. Take nothing more from this land. Go home." Ikuma listened to all of this with his jaw set. When a Pewdie was finished, Ikuma said, with respect, that he did not believe in giant wolves. He said that something had killed those wolves we found, and something had broken those traps, and that something was an animal, not a story. He said he intended to find it, and shoot it, and bring its hide back to prove what it was. A Pewdie looked at him a long time. Then he looked away into the fire and said nothing. In the morning Ikuma had his way. 3 of us would go with him, deeper inland, following the tracks we had already found. A Pewdie would stay at the staging camp with 2 of the younger men and the bulk of the supplies. If we did not return within 12 days, they were to break camp and bring word back to the settlement that the hunting party was lost. We left at first light with 1 sled, 8 dogs, and rifles loaded. The tracks picked up again less than a mile from the camp, as though whatever had made them had been waiting for us to begin. They led north and slightly west, into rising ground that I had not crossed in years. Ikuma led on foot ahead of the sled, reading the prints, his face set hard against the wind. We followed them for 2 days. What we saw in those 2 days I have thought about every night since. The tracks did not deviate. A wolf, even a great wolf, will weave. It will follow scent. It will pause at a fresh kill, at a marking post, at the edge of cover. These tracks ran straight. Mile after mile in a line as true as a surveyor's, across open snow, across frozen creek beds, up the side of a ridge where no animal would choose to climb when easier ground lay alongside it. Whatever made them did not seem to care about cover or about cold or about the wind that came scouring down off the high country. On the 2nd day we found the sled. It lay in a hollow half a day's run from any known trail. It had been a good sled, well made, the runners bound in bone. It had been smashed. The crossbars were splintered. The lashings were torn. The harness lay in pieces, still buckled, as though the dogs had been ripped out of it without being unfastened. There were no dogs. There were no remains. There were no tracks of dogs leaving the site, only the great prints of the thing that had come to it, circling once and continuing north. Near the sled, caught in a splinter of the broken crossbar, was a tuft of hair. Dark, almost black at the root, silvered at the tip. Coarser than wolf. Each strand longer than my middle finger. And on a chunk of frozen seal meat that had been thrown from the sled in the wreck, there were teeth marks. A single bite. The arc of the jaw was wider across than the length of my forearm from elbow to fingertip. Pana was the one who measured it. His hands shook when he did. We made camp that night in the lee of an ice ridge. The sled pulled close. The dogs tethered in a tight ring around the fire. None of us slept well. I took the first watch. Ikuma took the second. Nanak took the third. Pana we let sleep through, because he was young, and because his hands had not stopped shaking since the broken sled. In the dark, sitting against the runner of our own sled with the rifle across my knees, I listened to the tundra the way a Pewdie had taught me to listen when I was a boy. Not for sound, but for the shape of silence. Silence has a shape. It has folds in it where wind has been, and gaps where animals have moved through, and pressure in it when something is near and holding still. There was pressure that night. I felt it the way you feel a hand laid lightly on the back of your shoulder when you think you are alone in a room. I did not turn around. I sat with the rifle across my knees and I watched the fire, and I did not turn around. In the morning we continued north. By midday we came on the first of the old camps. It was older than any camp our party had set that season. The snow had drifted over it, but the shape was clear once you knew to look. A ring of stones where a fire had been. The bleached uprights of a tent frame snapped at the base. A small cache pit opened, emptied. Ikuma cleared the snow from the fire ring with his boot. The charcoal beneath was old, but not ancient. He guessed 3 winters, perhaps 4. He said the camp had belonged to hunters, not travelers. There was no body. There was no equipment. There were no tracks at all around the camp because the snow had buried whatever had once been there. We found a second old camp before nightfall, less than 2 miles from the first. It looked the same. A third the next morning, again less than 2 miles further on. 3 camps, 3 vanished parties. All in a line, all heading the same direction we were now heading, and all stopped, abandoned in place, at roughly the same kind of low, sheltered ground. Ikuma did not speak for a long time after the third one. When he did, he said, "These were not lost men. These men knew what they were doing," he said. "They made these camps the way we make ours. They were not running, they were hunting." He did not finish the thought. He did not have to. That afternoon we found the pattern in the tracks. I had been watching the great prints all morning. They had been running ahead of us, as before, in their straight northbound line. But around midday I noticed something I had not noticed before. The prints crossed our own old line of march from the previous day. They had circled us. Ikuma found another crossing within the hour, then another. The thing had been pacing us in a wide arc, perhaps a mile out, sometimes more. It had been on our flank since we left the staging camp, possibly longer, possibly since the pass where Siku had refused to walk. We were not tracking it. It had been tracking us. It had let us follow its tracks. It had drawn us, camp by camp, along its old hunting line, in the direction it wanted us to go. Nanak said quietly, "We should turn back." Ikuma said nothing. He looked at the great prints in the snow, and at the wide white nothing all around us, and he set his jaw. We did not turn back. I have asked myself every winter since why we did not. The honest answer is that we were afraid to turn our backs on it. As long as we were moving forward, we believed we knew where it was. If we turned, we did not. We saw it for the first time the next evening, at dusk. The sky that night was the deep blue that comes between the last gray of day and the first black of true night. A wind had risen, but not yet a storm. We were crossing a wide flat of old sea ice that fed up into the mouth of a frozen river. The land rose ahead of us in low ridges, the snow on them stripped to a hard, pale shine. Nanak saw it first. He did not shout. He simply stopped walking, put his hand on my sleeve, and turned my shoulder toward the ridge to our right. It stood on the crest, perhaps 400 paces from us. At first I thought it was a stone. The shape of it was wrong for an animal. It was too large, and too still, and too high at the shoulder. I looked again, and the shape resolved, the way a face resolves out of shadow when your eyes adjust to a dark room. It was standing on 4 legs. The line of its back was higher than the back of any wolf I had ever seen, higher than my own shoulder, and I was not below it. Its head was lowered, slightly, the way a wolf lowers its head when it watches prey at distance. Its ears were forward. The light caught its eyes. Just for a moment, 2 points of cold reflection set wide apart, far wider apart than the eyes of any wolf should sit. It did not move. I do not know how long we stood there. It felt like a long time. The wind moved the loose snow around our boots. The dogs had gone silent. Even Siku, who had refused the past days before, did not whine. He had lain down in his harness with his head against the snow. Ikuma raised his rifle slowly. He did not fire. He told me later that he had it sighted clean. He said he could have put a round through the center of its chest. He said he did not pull the trigger because something in him would not let his finger move. A gust of wind came up off the flat. The snow lifted in a fine sheet between us and the ridge. When the sheet passed and the air cleared, the ridge was empty. There had been no sound of it leaving, no crunch of paws, no scrape of weight on the crust. It had simply not been there anymore. Pena said into the silence, "That is not an animal." No one answered him. We made our camp that night where we stood, because nightfall had come and we had nowhere better to go. Ikuma wanted to push back along our trail toward the staging camp. Nanak wanted to stay where we were and wait for daylight. I sided with Nanak. Moving in the dark, with that thing somewhere on our flank, felt worse than holding ground. We built the fire higher than we should have. We knew we were burning fuel we would need later, and we did not care. The light pushed the dark back perhaps 20 paces. Beyond that, the tundra was a wall. The footsteps started a little after the moon rose. They came from the north side of camp, where the ground sloped up toward the ridge we had seen the figure on. Slow, heavy. The crust of the snow gave under the weight with a soft, deep crunch, and then a pause, and then another step. Not the quick, light pacing of a wolf. The walk of something that did not need to hurry. Ikuma stood up with his rifle. He walked to the edge of the firelight. He listened. He took 2 steps out into the dark. The footsteps stopped. He waited. We waited. The wind moved across the camp. He came back and crouched by the fire and said the snow was clean, no prints. He had walked the whole north edge of our light. The crust was unbroken. Nanak said, "That is not possible." Ikuma said, "I know." The footsteps came again before we slept, this time from the east, the same slow, heavy crunch, the same pauses. We did not get up. We sat with our backs to the fire and our rifles across our knees, and we listened. Twice more in the night the steps came, once from the south, once from very close, close enough that I felt the breath of cold air that had been pushed ahead of something passing. There were never any tracks at first light. We checked. We walked the perimeter together, all 4 of us, and the snow was as we had left it. Pana broke before dawn. I do not blame him. He had not slept in 2 nights. He was 17 years old, and he had heard those footsteps, and he had seen the eyes on the ridge. He thought he heard a wolf yelp out beyond the eastern edge of the camp, just before the gray of morning. A single wolf, hurt or calling. He grabbed his rifle and he was up and out into the snow before any of us could stop him. Ikuma shouted after him. Nanak ran a few paces and then stopped, because the wind had risen suddenly and the snow had thickened, and the figure of Pana was already gone in the white. We found his rifle later that day, lying in the snow 100 paces from camp. We never found Pana. The storm broke on us that afternoon and did not let up for almost a full day. It was the kind of weather we call pixic in our language, where the wind drives the snow horizontally and the world reduces to the length of your own arm. We stayed in camp because to move in it was to die. We tied ourselves and the sled and the dogs together with a single long line, so that no one could be separated by more than a few paces without the rest knowing. We called for Pana through the wind for hours. The wind ate our voices. It was during the worst of the storm, with the light gray and the snow thick and the visibility almost nothing, that it came into the camp. I saw it first because I happened to be facing the right direction. I was crouched near the fire which we were struggling to keep alive, and I looked up because one of the dogs, the old gray Sikhu, had made a sound I had never heard a dog make. Not a bark, not a whine, a single low note in his throat, a sound an animal makes when it knows it is about to die and has accepted it. The wall of snow ahead of me parted. That is the only way I can describe it. Parted, the way water parts around a moving prow. It came through the gap. I had thought, on the ridge, that I had seen its size. I had not. On the ridge it had been 400 paces away, and the eye corrects for distance in ways the mind does not understand. Here, at perhaps 15 paces, with the firelight catching its flank, I understood for the first time what we were looking at. It was a wolf. The shape was unmistakable. The long muzzle, the set of the ears, the angle of the shoulder, the heavy ruff at the throat. It was a wolf in the way that a great old bull walrus is a seal. It was the shape of the thing carried to a size the shape was never meant to hold. It was taller at the shoulder than I am standing upright. Its head, when it lowered to look at us, came nearly to the height of my own. Its chest was broader than the chest of a draft ox I had seen once at a trading post on the southern coast. The fur was dark, almost black along the back, paling toward the belly and the legs, with the long silver tips Pana had found in the broken sled days before. The eyes were pale, pale and steady, and intelligent in a way that I will not try to describe, because the only word I have for it is the word I do not want to use, which is human. It did not lunge. It did not snarl. It walked slowly 3 steps into the firelight. The snow gave under it with the same deep crunch we had heard at the edges of camp for 2 nights. Its weight, I thought, must have been 600 or 700 pounds at least. More. I do not know. It looked at each of us in turn. Ikuma, Nanook, me. It held my eyes the longest. I felt in that long moment that I was being read, not seen. Read. As if every step I had taken on the tundra since I was a child was being turned over inside its head. Then it turned its head slightly toward the dark beyond the fire, and I understood, with a cold that was worse than the storm, that it had been here for weeks, watching the camps, watching us choose our routes, choosing itself which of us would go on and which would not. It stepped back into the snow. The wall closed behind it. Akuma broke first, not in courage, in direction. He stood up from the fire, his rifle in his hand, and he said, "We are leaving." He said it twice, in the flat voice of a man who has stopped arguing with himself. We did not pack properly. We took the rifles, the ammunition, what dried meat we could grab, and 1 knife each. We cut the dogs free of the picket line, all but the 4 we would harness to the sled. We left the tent standing. We left half the food. We ran south. The storm was still on us, but the worst of it was passing, and the wind had shifted. We followed our own old trail by feel as much as sight, the runners of the sled cutting into the half-buried groove we had cut on the way north. Nanak ran ahead on foot to lead the team. Ikuma drove the sled. I came behind on foot, last, rifle across my back, because someone had to be the one to look behind us, and I had drawn it. I looked behind us a great deal. For the first hour I saw nothing. The snow blew across our tracks almost as fast as we made them. The dogs were running with a fear I had never seen in dogs before, and they did not need driving. In the second hour I saw it again, once. A long shape moving on a parallel line, perhaps 200 paces off our left flank, keeping pace with the sled without seeming to hurry. It was not chasing. It was escorting. It was making sure we went the way it wanted us to go. We lost Nanak an hour after that. I do not know how. He was ahead of the team, and then he was not, and the trail he had been breaking simply ended at a patch of churned snow. There were no signs of struggle there either. There was only the absence of him, and a single one of the great prints set deep beside the place where his footprints stopped. We did not stop. Ikuma did not stop the sled. I think if he had stopped the sled, neither of us would have moved again. We reached the staging camp the next morning, at first light, with 2 dogs left in harness, and the other 2 cut loose somewhere behind us in the dark. Ikuma's face was white in patches where the cold had taken him. I could not feel my own hands. A putti was waiting outside his shelter. He had not slept. He looked at us, and he looked behind us at the empty trail, and he did not ask. He already knew. We rested at the staging camp for 1 full day, and then we broke it and went home. There was no more hunting that winter. What meat we brought back was thin, and the village ate carefully, and 2 old men and a child died before spring came, and we counted ourselves lucky that the number was not higher. We told what had happened. Some believed us. The men who had run dogs in the North Country all their lives believed us, because they had heard pieces of the same story from their fathers and their fathers' fathers. The younger men and the traders who came up from the south posts in summer did not believe us. They said it had been a bad winter. They said hunger does strange things to the eyes. They said Pana had wandered in the storm, and Nanak had fallen through thin ice, and Tulak, before any of it, had simply frozen alone as men sometimes do. No one came to investigate. There was no one in our country in those years who would have come. The white men with their notebooks were still mostly along the southern coasts, and the stories of Inuit hunters were not the kind of stories they wrote down. The valleys north of the staging camp were marked in the way our people mark such things, which is not on any paper. They were spoken of, in the long winter nights, as a place that the hunting parties did not go. Other men, in the years that followed, walked carefully around them. Other men, in the years that followed, did not always come back when they did not. The story stayed in the mouths of those who had been there, and in the mouths of those who listened. I am an old man now. I do not run dogs anymore. My sons run them and my sons' sons. I have told them what I am telling you. I have told them the names of the men I lost. I have told them where the staging camp stood, and which valleys lie beyond it, and why they should not cross into those valleys, no matter how thin the meat caches grow. Some of them believe me, some of them do not. That is the way of sons. I will say only this. Not every predator that walks this country belongs to this country. Some of them were here before us. Some of them are still here. The land remembers what walks it, even when men forget. Somewhere beyond the last hunting trail, beneath the cold and quiet of the Arctic moon, it is still waiting.